So we have been looking at the Olivet Discourse, which is where Jesus talks a lot about his return and his second coming. And the last thing that we saw was his final parable in Matthew 25, verse 31, which began this way: when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and before him will be gathered all the nations, and he'll separate people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And you remember how the rest of the parable goes. But he closes with this talk of the kingdom. What's interesting is what comes next. And I want you to watch how the Apostle Matthew tells this story, because there's a method to what he does that runs through his book, and I want to kind of share that with you today. He talks about this time of glory, and he's talking to the apostles here. And you remember we saw that what they're being told is what matters is how people will treat believers, right? That there's a judgment on that, and you better not turn against his sheep, because he will judge against you for that. And they're promised persecution. He says, look, get ready. They're going to turn against you, but eventually there will be glory when the Son of Man comes again. And that's the blessed hope that we all have. Well, Jesus lays that out here, and then look at what he says in Matthew chapter 26. Very next chapter, very next verses. When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." After talking about glory, he goes back and talks about his death, his suffering, his crucifixion. That's actually a pattern throughout the book of Matthew. The first 15 chapters are all about establishing Jesus' glory. You have the Sermon on the Mount and his teaching, and the crowds are like wowed at how amazing his teaching is. And then you see all these healings of blind people and mute people and demons being cast out. And you see all this power, and boy, people don't know what to make of him. And when you come to chapter 16, Jesus asks his disciples, it says, when he came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And after all of that, Jesus strictly charged the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. And from that time, when his disciples recognized and confessed that he's the Christ, the King, the Son of God, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes. He must be killed, and on the third day be raised. That's Matthew 16, 20 and 21. Do you remember how Peter responded? Peter grabbed Jesus and said, "Far be it from you. No way. I'm not going to let this happen." And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan. You have in mind the things of man, not the things of God." The things of God are suffering and dying. The disciples couldn't figure that out. They struggled with that because to them the Messiah was all about glory. The Son of Man coming on his glorious throne and judging the world and ruling in righteousness. What's this suffering thing about? And yet Jesus repeats it again and again. Just a chapter later, right? Just a few verses later, The story is this. Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. And remember, he was with Moses and Elijah, and they were talking. And Peter said, wow, we need to build 3 tabernacles here to worship. Like, yeah, this is glory. This is amazing. And just like that, it all vanished. And as they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, don't tell anyone the vision until the Son of Man is raised. Really? It's like he shows them all this glory and then says, shh. Just a few verses later, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the 3rd day. And they were greatly distressed. What is this about? You show us your glory. You show us who you really are. We've confessed who you really are. And every time we recognize that and you turn around and tell us you're going to suffer and die. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. That's Matthew 17. When you go to 2 chapters later, Matthew 19, Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler. Remember him? He came and said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he tells him, you must go and sell everything you have. And then Peter hears this and he says in reply, look, we've left everything and followed you. What will we have? And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne. Oh, here we go again. We're back to glory. You who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, and everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or lands for my name's sake will receive 100-fold, 100 times as much, and will inherit eternal life. That's Matthew 19. Just a few verses later, it says, in Matthew 20, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he'll be raised on the 3rd day. Every time it gets worse, right? It gets more and more detailed. Glory, crucifixion. Glory, death. Glory, suffering. Now, the disciples couldn't handle that. That suffering part, they were certain that it was a parable or a symbol or something like that. Now, that's Matthew 20, verses 18 and 19. Look at the next verse. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, James and John's mother comes up with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, what do you want? And she said to him, say that these 2 sons of mine, the doctor and the attorney, right? Good Jewish mother. She's proud of her sons. Say that these 2 sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. He just said, I'm going to suffer and die. And she can't process that. She ignores it and says, I know we're going up to Jerusalem. We're going up for glory. Let my sons sit on either side of you. I want a special place for them. Incidentally, the other disciples were not happy with this. It says that they got indignant, and that launches into another story. But I want you to look at what Jesus said to them. Jesus answered, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am going to drink? What's he talking about? He's talking about suffering. I am going to drink the cup of suffering. Are you able to do it? Now, I didn't include their answer. James and John step up and say, we're able. Well, it's not going to be too long in the story before they are running away from the soldiers in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? This happened over and over again. Do you remember the they're also walking on the road, and they're arguing about which of them is going to be greatest in the kingdom. right? They're going up to Jerusalem. He's telling them, I'm going to suffer and die. And they're arguing about the glory of the kingdom. And they are certain that they'll all stand with Jesus, right? When Jesus tells them at the Last Supper, I'm going to be, the shepherd's going to be smitten and the sheep will be scattered. And Peter says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. I will die with you. And Jesus says, really? Before the cock crows 3 times, you're going to deny me 3 times. Oh, I'd never do that. And all the other disciples are like, yeah, we'll be with you. We will die with you. And then when the chance comes to be arrested and die, they turn tail and run. They're just like us, right? They like the idea of glory. They can't process suffering. Let's go back to where we were after Jesus finished all these sayings, the Olivet Discourse. He says to his disciples, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Now most everything from here on out is going to be about suffering, not glory. I want you to watch, though, the way Matthew tells the story. And I want you in particular to pay attention to the first word in the next verse I'm going to show you. Then. Matthew uses this word, right, when he tells the story to shift the scene. So if you were watching this as a movie or a TV show, that word then would be the signal to change the scene. You know how we go from scene to scene? So in the first scene, we see Jesus telling the disciples, I'm going to die. And now it shifts. And Matthew says, then, when Jesus told them he was going to die, then the chief priests and elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. Right? He says, I'm going to die, and now we see a scene where the chief priests are plotting to get him out of the way. Now another story is going to be told. Matthew chapter 26, verse 6, and we're going to land on this one for just a little bit. When Jesus was at Bethany, now Jesus at this time, Bethany, remember, you have the temple on Mount Zion, and then you have the Kidron Valley that goes down, and on the other side is the Mount of Olives. And when you go up over the Mount of Olives and down the other side, about 2 miles away, there's a little village called Bethany, separated by that mountain range from Jerusalem. So it's kind of like a suburb there, but a small village. And there's some very famous people that live there. Lazarus lives there with his sisters Mary and Martha. Also, this man, Simon the leper, lives there. Now, we don't know very much about him. We know he's a Pharisee by comparing the Gospels. But he's probably Simon the leper because he had been a leper and Jesus healed him. So Jesus, for the most part, is staying out of Jerusalem and is staying over there on the other side of the mountains, 2 miles away, with his friends in this village of Bethany. And there's a dinner being held at the house of Simon the leper. Now, this event probably occurred a week before. Matthew doesn't always follow chronological order. He tells his stories by theme that he's trying to convey. So this happened like a week before, but Matthew puts it here because he wants to make a point with the story. And Jesus is there, and like 2 weeks prior to that, he had raised Lazarus from the dead. And this was now the talk of the town. And John tells us that at this meal that was being held in Jesus' honor, Lazarus was there as a guest. And Martha, Lazarus' sister, as always, was helping serve dinner. Mary wasn't. Mary was doing something else, like Mary always did. When Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman, and this woman, we're told in the Gospel of John, is Mary. A woman came up to Jesus with an alabaster flask, which in itself is very expensive, and it is full of expensive ointment. John tells us that it is nard or spikenard. I was actually trying to get some spikenard, and I was going to put it in dispensers around the room, and make the whole room smell like spikenard so you would know what it smelled like. And I thought, somebody's bound to be allergic to that. So I didn't. She had an alabaster flask of this expensive ointment. John tells us she broke it and poured it over Jesus' head and feet. She poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. Now, we look at that and say, wow, that's like kind of like what a dirty trick. But remember, in those days, they didn't really have deodorant and perfume. If you've ever been down Lancaster County, spent any time with any Amish people, au naturel, right? And we as human beings, we smell pretty bad, right? And, you know, I mean, you can wash and everything, but it's like after a while we smell. So God made all these wonderful flowers and herbs, and you can get ointments from it that smell good and makes us smell better and more acceptable. Well, so that's what this was for. And she pours the whole thing. I don't think she was sending Jesus a message, right? She's doing this out of the goodness of her heart to please him as he reclines at the table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant. They're mad. Oh my word. Do you know how much that alabaster flask was worth? And the ointment itself was worth a lot of money. Why this waste? Set the scene again. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. There's excitement. They're waiting for Jesus to go to glory. He's going to go into Jerusalem now, and boy, he's going to put it to the priests and the Pharisees and the elders of the people, boy. He's going to bring in the kingdom, and we're going to sit at his right and at his left. That what we've been waiting for, it's all about to come into pass. And they're holding a dinner in Jesus' honor, and this lady honors him with this good-smelling ointment that wafts through the room, and they all say, why this waste? This could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. Yes, sir, boy, social justice warriors. John adds an interesting detail. John says this, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Okay. He was able to calculate the number. He's a numbers guy. He's the guy that takes care of the money. A denarius is 1 day's wage. 300 denarii is almost a year's worth of wages. This was very pricey perfume. And he's furious. And all the disciples are furious. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you trouble the woman? If I was translating this, if there was a Chris Eshelman translation, it would be, quit hassling her. What are you doing? Why are you troubling this lady? She's done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. I'll bet that room just went, yeah, Jesus isn't exactly the life of the party here, is he? All of a sudden, in the midst of all of the celebration, everything turns, and he turns it to suffering and dying. Now, I don't think that Mary's thought was to anoint him for burial. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think she was trying to bring blessing to him and thanksgiving for what he had done for her brother, for Lazarus. And there was excitement and celebration. But Jesus' mind, what's Jesus' mind on? Jesus' mind is on this: I am going to suffer and to die. And he brings that back to them to think about. And here they were fighting, the disciples are fighting, Judas is fighting, and why? Oh, we should have taken care of the poor, and what, all of these kinds of things. And Jesus says, let's remember, I'm going to die. This is for my burial. Then, camera's going to switch. He leaves us with that scene of quiet and Judas and the disciples all upset. And then he says, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give him if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, Judas sought an opportunity to betray him. Why does Matthew tell the story this way? Isn't it interesting that he connects the scene of Judas wanting to betray Jesus with Jesus at a party, reminding them that he's going to die? If you've watched the TV series The Chosen, there's some great things about it. There's some goofy things about it. But on the whole, I like it. I think it's a great way to present the gospel story to 21st century people in a way that they can understand. And the way that they've chosen to portray Judas, and it's only an interpretation, is this: that he didn't like the idea of suffering. He believed in Jesus as the Messiah, and he went to the priest because what he wanted to do was hand Jesus over so that Jesus could prove himself once and for all. He was certain Jesus would go in there and show his power and put the Pharisees in their place and put the chief priests in their place. He would take the throne and he would rule, and the kingdom would come in. That's how they portray him in the story. Now, that's just an interpretation, and it's just a guess, but I think it's a very interesting guess. Because when I look at the Gospel of Matthew, do you see what this seems to be saying? This seems to be saying that Judas and all of the disciples were fine with the glorious throne part. But when Judas hears this again and again and again and again, and finally this, I'm going to be buried, I'm going to die and be buried, he says, that's it. Matthew sets it in that context and says that's why he went to the priests. He didn't like the idea of Jesus having to suffer. He could not accept a suffering Messiah. You know, I think that's an interesting warning to the church. I think it's an interesting warning to us here in the American church. We are tremendously blessed in this life. It always drives me nuts, and I've expressed this to Josh with the songs that we pick. Contemporary Christian music is written by guys who wear all kinds of jewelry and are able to afford tattoos and all that kind of stuff, and play electrical instruments and go on tour, and they're fed 3 square meals a day, and then they talk about all my pain and all my suffering. Now, yes, people do have pain and suffering. Yes, we do. And some of those guys do too. But I don't know, there's just something about it that kind of just irks me when I look at America and then I look at my brothers and sisters in China or Iran or in the communist or Islamist regimes who are paying by having fingers cut off or tongues cut out or lives taken. They know suffering. They know what it means to walk with Jesus in a difficult world. And here in America, we are blessed. And I think sometimes we overlook all of the blessing And we forget all the blessing. And we think Christianity is about blessing. Like, well, God's job is to bless me. God's job is to do miracles for me, right? I shouldn't have to suffer. I'm one of the kids of the king. Even our funerals, right? When we do a funeral, and I'm not opposed to doing funerals this way. I'm just pointing out to you how we look at it. We don't want to mourn or grieve. We want to celebrate the life of our beloved. What does that mean? It means I don't want to look at death. I'm going to look back here at everything they did and all the fun and all the things that they meant to me. Now that's fine, but you know what? They died. They died. Yes, they've received the ultimate healing. There are Christians that say that. There are Christians that, God's always blessing, God's always doing miracles, God's got to heal. There are some people who believe that by faith they can overcome any illness. Well, I got news for you. Lazarus didn't overcome the illness the first time, and you know what? He had to die a second time too. That poor guy. You're going to die. Unless Jesus comes, you're going to die. Oh, but death is the ultimate healing and the victory. No, death is the defeat. Death is the defeat. You know what the victory is? Resurrection. That's the healing. That's the new body. That's the new hope. But somehow we just have this thing that we want to be upbeat and always upbeat and everything's good and everything's great. And yet Jesus, when he talked to the disciples, he put the glorious future way off in the future. He said, there's a long delay. I'm going to suffer and die, and so are you. Most of the disciples struggled with that. Judas seems to have refused to accept it. Matthew, in telling the story, talks about how then the Passover supper was set up, and it says, when it was evening, he reclined at the table with the 12, and as they were eating, he said, now this is Passover. This is the celebration of Israel coming out of Egypt. It's liberty, it's freedom, it's God's salvation. And as they were eating, he said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. One of you is going to hand me over to be crucified. And they were sorrowful and began to say to him one after the other, is it I, Lord? I looked at that when I was reading in the Greek Testament. There's actually a negative particle in there. I think if I was translating it, I would translate it this way. It isn't me, is it? And each one, it isn't me. Is it me? It's not me, is it? And they're asking around the table. And he answered, he who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. Now, let me explain this to you, because when you compare John, there's some things that we learn about this. He didn't say this to all of them, and he didn't say it out loud. The dish that he's talking about is called the korek. It's a part of the meal at Passover where the head of the table takes a piece of matzah, dry broken bread, and he dips it first in horseradish, right? So real bitter horseradish. And then there's another thing that you dip it in called haroset, and that's made of apples and nuts and wine, spices. So it's supposed to cut some of the bitterness. And it's to remind you of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. So the leader would make these little koreks, these sandwiches, and hand them out. And Jesus is saying, the one that I give this sandwich to, this korek, is the one who's going to betray me. Now, we think, he said it out loud. When you read John, he didn't. Let me show you how this worked. Can you see all this picture? This is how they ate at the table. They reclined. They did not sit in chairs. They laid and leaned on one shoulder. And then in front of them, there was a low table made of either boards or sometimes just like a blanket or sheet laid out, and the food would be served on that table. So at this table, Jesus would be sitting right here, right? That would be considered the head of the table. And John was in the seat of the favored guest, right next to Jesus. So he was leaning, Jesus was behind him, and Peter was across the table at the place of the lowest guest. He probably chose to be there as a matter of humility, right? So he's over on that other side, and right next to Jesus on the other side, in the place of the second guest, is Judas. Now, John tells us that Peter, when Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me, he says that Peter signaled to John across the table and said, John, ask him who it is. You know, he probably mouthed it. So John just leans back against Jesus. They're right together. He leans right on his breast and says, Lord, who is it? And Jesus says to John, it's the one who dips his hand in the dish. In other words, that I give this sandwich to. And Jesus made the correct and turned and handed it to Judas. And that's how John knew. And eventually, of course, afterwards when they talked, they all knew. And probably right there is when Judas, who was going to betray him, answered, it's not me, is it, Rabbi? The audacity. There are people who are wicked enough and evil enough that they will lie to you right to your face. Judas knew exactly what he was doing, and so did Jesus. And Jesus said to him, you said it. John tells us at this point, Jesus said, whatever you have to do, go and do quickly. And Judas got up and left and ran and left the room in a hurry. They didn't know why he was leaving. It says nobody in the room at that time knew why he was leaving. They thought that what Jesus meant was go out and buy more food for the feast or go out and give a donation to the poor. They didn't know. But we know where Judas went. It says he went out, and John writes, and it was night. Yeah. I don't think he's talking just about the evening, the hour of the day. Night is darkness. And Judas is going out into the dark to do dark things. And now the traitor is gone, and it's just Jesus and those who are faithful to him. And Matthew says, now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it. Don't picture soft bread that's torn. Picture like a saltine cracker or a matzah cracker that's broken in pieces. And he gave it to his disciples and said, take and eat. This is my body. It's a broken body. It's going to be broken for you. And I want each of you to have a piece, because each one of you is a part of my body, and you will share in the brokenness. Be part of me. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them and said, drink of it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins. The blood of the covenant is the blood that's of the animal that's sacrificed to ratify a covenant. Moses sacrificed, I think, something like 10 or 12 bulls to make the Old Testament law, put it in force. Jesus says, I am the sacrifice, and my blood is shed. Take it, drink it, all of you, because you are participating in the forgiveness that I'm giving you. See what he points to? He points to his suffering. He points to a broken body, and he says, join me. Be part of me. Recognize who you are. recognize what I've called you to. Now there's one more line. One more line before they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus says, I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. See, he points to glory. He points to glory, but he says, if you're going to participate with me now, you're looking at brokenness and suffering. You're looking at forgiveness of sins, but you're also looking at sins that needed to be forgiven. You're looking at being humbled, and you're looking at grace flowing out to you. That is what the Lord's table is about. The Apostle Paul in this read this idea, and he tells us in 1 Corinthians, whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you show forth the Lord's death. You remind yourself of his death until he comes. Someday in glory, Jesus will sit at the head of an enormous table, a sumptuous feast, and he will raise that cup, and we'll raise ours, and there will be a great cheer, and it will be eternal joy. And that's a great day. I can't even imagine that. But until then, remember he told them in the parables, there's a long delay. Be ready for a long delay. And if they persecuted me, they'll persecute you. If we're going to be faithful to the Lord, yes, glory is coming, but boy, not necessarily right now. There may be shafts of glory that show us promise and hope and give us joy and sustain us through the difficulties, but we ought not be afraid of the suffering that can come. I'll be honest with you, I don't like that idea. I hate preaching it. This is not an upbeat American message. This is awful. But if you're going to follow Christ, if you can't listen to a message like that and say, you know what, this is what I need to be, how are you ever going to share in glory with him? He says we'll share in glory provided that we suffer with him, because when he calls us, he turns our canoe around and we're going the opposite direction from everybody else. And we're different. I'd like to call our elders forward to assist me in serving communion. I probably need like 4 of you. 1, 2, 3. Chris, that'll be 4. Let's just take some time to quiet our hearts and remind ourselves of who called us and what we're called to. We're reminded of his death for the forgiveness of our sins and of the broken body of which we are a part. If you're participating in that, then I would urge you, no matter what church you're from, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ and need to remind yourself of this, take a piece of bread with us and remind yourself of what he has done for us and what he's called us to. Let's just take some time to quiet our hearts, and then Brother Jesse Torrens, would you return thanks for the bread?
Father, I just thank you for this reminder of the obedience of your Son to you. That he was willing to offer up himself to buy us back and make us right with you. And Father, I just ask that each one of us here today would be encouraged to be obedient when the time comes that we need to be obedient. And all focus would be on you. Just thank you again for this free sacrifice. Thank you.